Hello everyone, welcome to SplitSecond. My name is Sequeira and I'll be taking you through today's match. Before starting, we at SplitSecond want to thank everyone for your constant support, suggestions on Discord, Reddit and YouTube. If you would like to keep helping us grow, you can do so by either liking this video, subscribing to our channel, or even by pledging to our Patreon. Check the links below for more information. Always remember, all feedback and support will help us become better and will provide you with richer content each week. Today I'm joined by Luís Brandão, Baal and another guest. He is a friend and a level 1 judge at our LGS, Gonçalo Tiago. Our commanders are me piloting a Purphoros the Bronze-Blooded list from one of our patrons, Max. Luís Brandão with his staxy brew of Hapatra. Gonçalo Tiago playing his pet deck and my personal nightmare Titania. And finally, Baal is trying TronBonne's Fblthp. I can only pronunciate Baal's commander's name right once. Let's check our starting hands. Baal is this week's starting player. He had to mulligan down to 6, and he did his best to keep some interaction with Reality Shift and Stifle. He kept 2 islands and 1 Skyling Tarn, as well as Mox Ember to ramp out whenever his commander, Son Goku, is out on the battlefield. He chose to send his Codex Shredder to the bottom of his library because his Tarn could seek out Mystic Sanctuary and give him some interaction back. My hand is pretty selfish. I have 2 mountains and an endless sands should I desire to cheat and keep a creature from Purphoros. I have Catalyst Elemental for ramp, Cavalier of Flames and Thrill of Possibility as draw engines, and Dracozet to take out some pesky creatures or players. Luís's hand is mostly about lands and mana. Mox Diamond, Gemstone Caverns, Windswept Heath, Chaos Cradle, and Crop Rotation. He also has card selection from his Divining Top and a Scout Lamp to make use of Hapatra Stax. This could mean either a turn 1 Hapatra or a turn 1 top to give him better draws. Finally, Gonçalo's hand isn't ideal, but he had already mulliganed once, and he figured his Collector Roof could really affect Baal's game plan, and perhaps even my ramp. He has a Tireless Tracker should the Oof not stick. For lands he has a Forest, a Boseiju and a Lotus Veil. Finally, he has a Foot Chain to combo out with Titania later on. That's it for our starting hands, let's watch how things play out. Although he had a pre-game action, Brandão didn't use his Gemstone Caverns, mostly out of fear of an early Blood Moon from me. This way, he also had a land to discard with his Mox Diamond. Baal starts the game by drawing and playing a Gitaxian Probe with Phyrexian mana. He decides to look into my hand, maybe to get a clear idea of what the deck might do. He only gets to see the aggressive side of Purphoros, not actually finding any hints of its combo lines. He draws a card. Afterwards, Baal plays an island and passes. My turn isn't exciting, I simply play a mountain and pass to Luís. Luís gets a bit more stuff going. He plays Windswept Heath, then he plays Mox Diamond and discards a recently drawn Lake of the Dead. He cracks the fetch for a basic forest and plays Hapatra, looking to prey upon Gonçalo's mana darks. He passes. Gonçalo's turn is simple. He drops a forest and lets Baal get to his turn. Baal puts another basic island into play. Then he plays his Mox Ember, followed by his commander, Dora the Explorer. Dora triggers and it draws Baal a card. He passes to me. My second turn is still looking unexciting. I play a mountain and pass, fully untapped and ready to interact. Probably. Brandão gets to his turn, looking to spawn some snakes and kill Baal's commander, the Sailor Moon. He attacks Gonçalo, triggering Hapatra. Before he is able to resolve the trigger and take Sailor Moon out, Baal casts Stifle, countering the trigger. He explains he had actually considered countering the fetch trigger, but wanted to see where Luís was headed instead. Brandão goes to his second main phase and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He casts Sensei's Divining Top and passes to Gonçalo. Gonçalo starts by playing a Command Beacon. He taps 2 lands to cast a Collector Roof, also collecting a Frown from Baal along the way. Literally everyone checks their hands for artifacts before Luís activates the Divining Top with his Forest in response, reorganizing his next draws. The Oof resolves and we go to Baal's turn. He starts by putting a Sculling Tarn into play. He plays a Lion's Eye Diamond, lifting our eyebrows in the process and tapping both islands to Reality Shift the Collector Oof. The Oof is exiled and Gonçalo manifests the top card of his library, which we all hope is a Crater Roof Behemoth, although it's actually a Secret Triumph of the Hordes. Afterwards, Baal cracks his fetch for another basic island and activates the LED. He discards Dispel, Basalt Monolith, and an Echo of Eons, revealing his intentions. Hoping I haven't drawn a red Elemental Blast in the meantime, Baal casts the Echo. Luís responds by cracking his Bloodstained Mire for a Taiga. The Echo resolves and we all shuffle our graveyards and hands into our libraries before drawing new cards. Baal got himself a new and extremely flooded hand, 4 islands, an ancient tomb, a blink of an eye, and a back to basics. My draws were as appalling as Baal's. I got 4 mountains, a prismatic lens, a mind stone, and an inferno titan. It's the holy mother of floods. Luís's new hand is a lot more versatile. He has Smokestack to try and overpower us, a Nobelisk Spider as a combo piece with Hapatra, Playcrafter to annoy us, and a Sylvan Scrying for utility lands. He also drew City of Brass, Verdant Catacombs, and the Cradle he had just shuffled into his library. Finally, Gonçalo was sad to lose his Foot Chain, trading it for a hand with 3 lands: Hickory Woodlot, Forest, and Crystal Vein. He also got Terastodon, Lightning Greaves, Beast Within, and Tooth and Nail to try and take us down. It's a somewhat slow hand, but Titania could easily tip the scales. Baal attacks Luís with his Bart Simpson for 1 commander damage before passing the turn. Now that I'm the one playing, I put a 3rd basic mountain into play and cast my 2 ramp artifacts, Prismatic Lens and Mind Stone. I half-heartedly go to my end step. Once I get to my end step, Luís activates his top before his turn. Luís decides it's finally time for Hapatra to spawn some snakes. He attacks me with her and is finally able to take out Baal's commander, the Samurai Jack. He puts a -1/-1 counter on Samurai Jack and creates a 1/1 snake with Death Touch. On his second turn, Luís plays a Gaia's Cradle, spelling trouble for us. He taps all mana sources except for his Taiga to cast Smokestack. Extremely well positioned as far as board presence goes, Luís passes the turn. On his turn, Gonçalo plays a Forest. He then casts Lightning Greaves and equips the Manifested card before going to combat. He attacks Baal, mostly because he figured he'd threaten his winning more than I would. Baal complains, saying I have huge creatures in my deck, and I reiterate no one has seen me do anything but ramp and play lands. This means Baal takes 2 damage before getting to his turn. He starts by playing an island and casting it back to basics, looking to kill Luís's Cradle. He passes to me. Since it's time to help Luís calm down a bit with his attempt at staxing us, I decided to help the party by playing a mountain and hard-casting my Inferno Titan, killing all of Luís's creatures and possibly his Smokestack plan with it. I pass. On his upkeep, Luís orders the Smokestack triggers, so he resolves the sacrifice trigger first, which means he doesn't sacrifice anything, and then he puts a suit counter on the stack. He plays a Verdant Catacombs, cracking it for a basic swamp. He uses his basic lands to cast Playcrafter, sacrificing it and getting rid of my Inferno Titan in the process. He also takes Gonçalo's Manifested Triumph of the Hordes and forces Baal to discard an Ancient Tomb. On Luís's end step, Gonçalo plays a Crop Rotation. He sacrifices his Command Beacon and finds himself an Ancient Tomb. On his upkeep, Gonçalo is forced to sacrifice his Lightning Greaves for the Smokestack. He plays a Crystal Vein, sacrifices it, and casts his commander, losing 2 life to the Ancient Tomb. Titania enters the battlefield and returns the Crystal Vein to Gonçalo's board. He passes the turn to Baal. During his upkeep, Baal decides to sacrifice his Mox Ember for the Smokestack. He plays yet another basic island and passes to me. During my own upkeep, I sacrifice the Prismatic Lens. I play yet another basic mountain before casting my Purphoros and passing. Luís starts his turn by taking out the Smokestack, especially considering how it could give Titania free elemental creature tokens for no reason. Then, he casts a Sylvan Library and passes. Gonçalo starts his turn by playing a Hickory Woodlot. It seems like a suboptimal land to play with the back to basics on the battlefield. He attacks Baal once again, just so that he regrets his enchantment options. Baal responds with a kicked blink of an eye. Gonçalo cracks his Crystal Vein to get a 5/3 token with Titania, and casts a Frozen Grip to get rid of Baal's back to basic. The stack resolves, Baal is 1 card richer, and Gonçalo is passing his turn. During his first main phase, Baal casts Brainstorm. He is trying to resolve his flooded hand, and is also getting Luís's maximum levels of disapproval. Baal plays an island instead of a fetch, making Luís even more disapproving, and he taps it for a Soul Ring. He lets me get to my turn. I start by joyfully playing my 6th basic mountain. I then cast Goblin Engineer, and think for a bit before deciding to put a Mirage Mirror in my graveyard. I did this mostly because it lets me copy the Sylvan Library on the battlefield. I then cast a Spicy Sundial of the Infinite and pass to Luís with 3 untapped lands. Once I get to my end step, Luís activates his top before his turn. Luís goes to his turn and chooses to draw only 1 card from his library. He plays his City of Brass before recasting Hapatra. He then casts Sylvan Scrying for a Blast Zone. He passes to Gonçalo. Gonçalo gets to his turn and casts Titania, losing 2 life for the Ancient Tomb. Baal responds by hard-casting his Force of Will, preventing Gonçalo from getting his commander out. Even though he saw his Titania countered, Gonçalo still decides to attack Luís because he has a Sylvan library out. Then, he passes. Baal starts off his turn by floating 2 blue mana, returning 2 islands to his hand, and drawing 2 cards with Gush. That's a whole bunch of 2s. He plays another island and casts Rings of Brightheart, going to end step. I use my Goblin Engineer, fully hasted by the Purphoros, and swap Mind Stone for the Mirage Mirror. During my upkeep, I turn the mirror into a copy of the Sylvan Library. Then, I get to my draw step, cry in horror at the cards I'm meant to be drawing, and lose 8 life to get them out of the way. I play a Strip Mine just because there's way too many good lands on the battlefield for me to ignore, and also because I can use the Mirage Mirror to copy the Rings of Brightheart and destroy 2 lands. I choose to let Luís get to his turn. Luís draws 3 cards with Sylvan Library and takes 8 damage. He then plays his Blast Zone and goes to combat, attacking Baal with his Hapatra and putting a -1/-1 counter on my poor engineer. He then casts a Contamination, warranting actual horror from Baal and Gonçalo, who read the card a few times. I, on the other hand, am fairly relaxed because I still have access to colored mana. Luís smiles and passes to Gonçalo. Gonçalo looks at the board with annoyance. We try to convince him to attack because Luís would never be able to sustain the Contamination if he blocked, but he remains unconvinced before passing. Baal plays a black mana producing island. He goes to his end step. I decide to destroy Luís's Blast Zone with my Strip Mine so he can get me out of the game as well. He does not respond. I then turn my Mirage Mirror into a copy of the Mox Diamond and activate my Goblin Engineer, sacrificing the Sundial for a Prismatic Lens. We go to my turn and I once again transform my Mirage Mirror into a Sylvan Library during my upkeep. I organize the top cards from my library and draw 1. Then I use my lens to filter the black mana into a red mana and use Purphoros to cheat in an Etali. Before I go to combat, the Etali gets petrified, making me extremely sad. Once I get to my end step, Luís activates his top before his turn. During his upkeep, Luís responds to the Contamination trigger with a Chord of Calling for 2. I respond and turn my Mirage Mirror into a Mox Diamond again, waiting to see what he gets. Luís puts a Channeler Initiate onto the battlefield. The Channeler Initiate puts 3 -1/-1 counters on itself, triggering Hapatra and giving Luís a snake. The Contamination trigger then resolves and Luís sacrifices another snake. He only draws 1 card from the library and casts a Winter Orb to try and stop me. I respond and sacrifice the Mirage Mirror for a Mind Stone with my Goblin Engineer. Luís goes to his end step. Gonçalo starts his turn and once again we're trying to convince him to attack Luís. He agrees this time around and Luís loses 5 life. Gonçalo passes the turn. Baal draws his card, plays an Academy Ruins and lets me get to my turn. I untap my artifacts and a single land. Then I draw the top card of my library and I float colorless mana with my Mind Stone before swapping it for Mirage Mirror. I use it to cop Hapatra and use Purphoros Ace to attack Gonçalo. I put a -1/-1 counter on the Channeler Initiate. It kills a mana source for Luís and gets me with a 1/1 snake with Death Touch. Then I pass the turn. Luís goes to his upkeep and decides he can't value outrace me with both Purphoros and the Mirage Mirror in play. He lets the Contamination go. The other 2 players rejoice the fact that they have a Man of the People on the table with them. Luís draws 3 cards with Sylvan Library and takes 8 damage. He attacks Gonçalo and kills my poor overworked engineer with Hapatra's trigger. He puts a second snake on the battlefield. Then, Luís plays his Obelisk Spider. He basic land cycles his Hash Barrens for a forest, plays a basic swamp, and passes to Gonçalo. Gonçalo removes the second depletion counter from his woodlot and loses 2 life to the Ancient Tomb. He casts Splendid Reclamation. He gets back his woodlot, the Crystal Vein, and the Command Beacon. He lets Baal get to his shenanigans. Baal starts the turn by preordaining. He keeps both cards on the top of the library and draws 1 of them. He passes. I draw a card, play a Nykthos, and go to my end step. Luís casts a Vampiric Tutor. On his turn, Luís only draws 1 card to his Sylvan Library. He casts Yawgmoth. Baal responds with Word of Invention, putting a Cursed Totem onto the battlefield and cutting the Yawgmoth shenanigans short. This was a vital play because Yawgmoth, Obelisk Spider, and Hapatra would kill us all. Afterwards, Luís activates his stop, trading it for the card on top of his library. He casts Earthcraft. Then, Luís goes to combat and attacks Baal with Hapatra. He kills my snake with Hapatra's trigger and produces his own. Obelisk Spider triggers, pinging us for 1 damage and giving Luís 1 life. On Luís's end step, Gonçalo casts a Nature's Claim and removes the Winter Orb from the battlefield, preparing for his turn. Now that he can play magic, Gonçalo sacrifices the Crystal Vein and taps his remaining lands to cast an Entwined Tooth and Nail, which resolves. After some consideration, Gonçalo decides it's the killing time, and he picks up an Avenger of Zendikar and a Craterhoof Behemoth. He resolves the Avenger's trigger first, putting 5 plants onto the battlefield, and then the Craterhoof gives all his creatures +8/+8 and trample until end of the turn. He attacks Luís for lethal. Luís responds and taps a snake, Yawgmoth, and a spider to activate Earthcraft, untapping 2 forests and a swamp. He then casts Cetizen Tactics to try and give his 2 untapped snakes +1/+1 and the ability to tap and fight target creature. Baal decides to intervene with a Dispel. It both counters the tactics and forces Gonçalo to trade his 2 big creatures with Luís's snakes, while still dealing lethal damage. Luís is out of the game. Now that he can participate, Baal plays yet another basic island and casts Nexus of Fate. Me and Gonçalo smile and shrug before Baal goes to his next turn. He draws, plays another island, and goes to his end step. Purphoros triggers and I play a Dragon Mage, which will now only get sacrificed at the beginning of my own end step. We go to my turn. I'm happy that I can finally untap my entire board. I'm just not very thrilled about the idea of giving Baal 7 new cards. I cast Ox of Agonas and discard a Helm of the Host and a Catalyst Elemental, drawing 3 cards. Afterwards, I play a Blast Zone, cast a Grafdigger's Cage, and decide to use my Dragon Mage and hope for the best by attacking Gonçalo. It's not an ideal wheel, mostly because the Cursed Totem now stops Purphoros from being activated since it's a creature. Baal responds to the Dragon's Mage trigger. He casts Rapid Hybridization, destroying the Avenger of Zendikar. We all discard our hands and draw 7 cards. Before going to my second main phase, Baal casts an Impulse. Then, I activate my Nyctos for 5 mana and cast Gilded Lotus. I also cast a Bag of Holding and go to my end step, sacrificing the Dragon Mage and turning Purphoros back into an enchantment. Gonçalo starts his turn by putting a Glacial Shroud on the battlefield. He responds to the Shroud's EDB trigger by floating green mana with a forest and sacrificing it. He then taps his remaining lands and loses 2 life to the Ancient Tomb, casting Titania. He returns a forest to his battlefield, taps it, and casts Sylvan Safekeeper. Baal responds with a buyback Capsize on Titania. His mana flooding is finally paying off. Gonçalo attacks Baal with his Beast token before passing. With a new hand and a buybackable Capsize, we're all wary about Baal's turn. He casts a freshly drawn Intuition, which isn't a good sign for us. He makes me choose between High Tide, Codex Shredder, and Basalt Monolith. Looking into his Academy ruins and counting his mana, I'm pretty sure that whatever I decide will end up the same, but I still choose to give Baal the Codex Shredder. Baal plays a Mox Opal. He then uses the Academy ruins to return his Basalt Monolith back to the top of his library. He casts Gitaxian Probe, choosing to look at my hand again. He loses True Life and draws a Monolith. He sees Elkite Tyrant, Neheb the Eternal, Ruby Medallion, Ark of Araska, and the Sequester's Stash. Baal casts the Monolith. He activates it and then untaps it, copying the untapped trigger with the Rings of Brightheart. I respond by tapping the Gilded Lotus and turning my Mirage Mirror into a second Gilded Lotus. I then activate the Bag of Holding and draw a Reforge the Soul, which I attempt to cast to also give Gonçalo a shot at interacting. Baal casts Pact of Negation, sealing our destiny with it. I discard the Arch, and it gets exiled into the Bag of Holding. Now, Basalt Monolith has 2 untapped triggers resolving thanks to the Rings of Bringheart. Baal is able to get a billion colorless mana. He uses it to cast his Codex Shredder. Now, Baal can use the Shredder's ability of sacrificing it to return a card from his graveyard to his hand and copy the trigger with the rings, also returning the sacrificed Shredder to his hand. This means that Baal has recursion of his entire graveyard. Baal focuses on getting the dramatic reversal and the intuition into his hand. He casts Intuition and gets himself an Isochron Scepter. With the dramatic reversal and the Isochron scepter, Baal is now able to have infinite blue mana and infinite generic mana. With the intuition and the Cosmic Shredder, he is able to get any card he wants from his deck into his hand. To make things simpler, Baal draws his entire deck with the Gitaxian Probe, and he is now able to have infinite turns with Nexus of Fate. He also capsizes all our permanents back to our hands. To seal our destiny, Baal casts his commander, Scooby-Doo. Now that he has infinite turns, Scooby-Doo can simply attack us on each extra turn and eventually kill us with command damage. Thanks for following us through this match, everyone. We're still on a monocolor win streak. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons. We'd like to give a special thanks to Izanagi and Carneiro, who are our first stack breakers. If you too would like to support us, you can do so by liking and sharing this video with your friends, subscribing or becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Come join us again next week for a new set of Commanders and more decisive plays. See you then!